Hi, I'm Eleanor, and this year I paid for my own birthday party only to find out it was actually a surprise celebration for my brother. They told me to smile, to be quiet, to be grateful. But tell me, how many times can you swallow disrespect before it poisons your peace? Before we dive in, what time are you watching this and where from? Drop it in the comments. Let's begin. I was in the middle of reviewing a risk model for a tech fund collapse when my phone lit up with the word mom. It rarely meant anything urgent, just usually something inconvenient. Still, I tapped accept. Hi, sweetheart. She started sweetly, drawing out the syllables like honey over gravel. I was wondering if you could help Liam. Not a hello, not a how's the new role, not even a rushed congrats on that promotion your Aunt Carol forwarded me the article about. Just straight to the ask. I leaned back in my office chair, turning slightly to look out over downtown Chicago from my 30th floor window. What kind of help? She gave a breathy laugh, the kind that hinted at pre-rehearsed manipulation. Well, he just got into Stanford's MBA program, but you know how expensive these things can be. We were thinking maybe you could pitch in a little with tuition just to take the pressure off. I didn't flinch. I'd heard this tune before. In a family of 3 siblings, somehow I was always the vault everyone borrowed from without deposit or acknowledgement. And by pitchin', you mean what? 5 grand? 10. I kept my tone flat. Oh, sweetheart, she said again, as if the endearment softened the audacity. Whatever feels comfortable. You're in finance. This must be peanuts to you. There it was. I didn't mention the 70-hour work weeks or how I'd missed my last 3 weekends because I was leading a due diligence review for an acquisition. I didn't tell her I'd just received the highest client retention score in the firm's history and had my name on a newly minted corner office plaque. Instead, I responded with the same icy grace I'd perfected over the years. Sure, I'll wire something by end of day. There was a pause and I could practically hear her smile through the line. That's my girl. By the way, we're doing a small birthday dinner for you next week. Nothing big, just us. I thought it might be nice to do something low-key at the house. I blinked. I'd nearly forgotten my own birthday. At the Springfield house? Yes, it'll be cozy. You could even pick the wine. We'll cover the rest. Which of course meant I'd be covering the rest. I'll take care of it, I said, and hung up without waiting for her reply. That evening, I transferred $4,000 to my mom's account. It wasn't the first time. Rent help for Chloe when she moved to NYC. New tires for Dad's truck. Tuition bridge loan for Liam last time he couldn't afford his final semester. Apparently, everyone else's needs were family responsibilities. Mine were luxuries. Just before heading to bed, I texted 2 of my closest friends from grad school, Sophie and Isabel. Want to come to Springfield next weekend? Small birthday dinner my family's hosting. Could use backup. Sophie replied first. Only if there's pie and maybe wine. Tell your mom we're crashing it. Then Isabel. I'd love to just say what to bring. I felt lighter for a moment until Chloe's message came through. Relax. It's just a family dinner. Don't overthink it. I stared at the screen. That phrase, just a family dinner, had become code in our house. Code for you're not the center of this. Code for we've made other plans and you're just a seat filler. The last time I'd heard it was when they threw Liam a surprise graduation party at the country club on the same weekend I completed a business fellowship that made national news. I got a text that night that said, "So proud of you. We toasted to you before dessert." I hadn't even been invited. I walked into my kitchen, poured a glass of water, and stood by the window, letting the coldness settle behind my eyes. I didn't cry. That ship had sailed a decade ago. Instead, I booked a rental car for Friday morning and began mentally packing. The birthday dinner would be another carefully staged production. But this time, I wanted to see for myself how much they'd rehearsed their lines. I pulled a dress from my closet, a sapphire blue sheath I'd bought years ago for my graduation. The one I never got to wear because Chloe had emergency rhinoplasty and really needed us home that weekend. I held it up to the light. It still looked new, still hadn't had its moment. As I folded it gently into my suitcase, my phone buzzed again. "Mom, don't be late. We have a surprise." I stared at the message, jaw tight. If there was one thing I'd learned, it was that, in this family, surprises were never about me. But I was finally ready to see what happened when the forgotten daughter showed up anyway. I pulled into the driveway just after 4 o'clock, letting the car idle a moment longer than necessary. The house hadn't changed. The same off-white siding, the same creaky mailbox tilting to the left, the same flower beds that only ever bloomed when company was expected. But what caught me off guard was the sheer volume of cars parked along the curb. At least a dozen, a few unfamiliar. Some had ribbons on the side mirrors. It didn't look like a birthday dinner. It looked like an event. As I stepped out of the car, a gust of spring air lifted the hem of my coat. Golden lanterns swayed from the porch. A long white rental tent stretched across the side yard, half set up with florals tied in perfect symmetry at each corner post. In the garage, I glimpsed crates of champagne flutes stacked beside buckets of ice. "This is a small family dinner," I muttered under my breath, hauling my overnight bag up the path. The front door opened before I could knock. Mom stood there in a blush silk blouse and too much lipstick. Her eyes flicked down to my shoes, then up to my face, landing somewhere behind me. "Eleanor, you made it," she said like she hadn't been the one who told me not to be late. She leaned in with a one-armed hug, not quite touching my shoulder. Inside, the air smelled of lemon candles and warm crab dip. The floors had been polished. Every light was dimmed just enough to feel like a catalog spread. She gestured vaguely toward the kitchen. "You want something to drink or maybe take a load off? You look like you've been driving all day." I opened my mouth, then closed it again. She didn't ask about the drive or how I was doing or say anything about the money I'd sent. "I can help with setup," I offered. She waved her hand, already turning toward the hallway. "No need. It's all handled. Just relax tonight. You always work too hard." That line again. I followed her into the dining room, noting how far things had escalated from low-key. The table had been extended with matching leaves, a new runner across the center, and hand-painted name cards propped beside polished silverware. One said, "Uncle Greg," another "Aunt Mara plus guest." No card for Sophie, no card for Isabel. "Hey," I asked casually, "did Sophie or Isabel RSVP to you? I mentioned they might swing by." Mom gave a sympathetic chuckle, shaking her head. "Oh honey, we didn't think they'd quite fit the vibe. It's just family, you know." Before I could respond, Chloe's voice drifted from the living room. "Of course Mom said that," she said, giggling. "It's classic guilt trip while planning a royal affair." I froze for half a second, then stepped into the next room. Chloe sat cross-legged on the couch, dressed like a Vogue spread, phone in hand, grinning at something she was showing Liam, who leaned in beside her, nodding along like this was all natural. "Nice setup," I said flatly. Chloe looked up, surprised, then smiled like I was the last guest to arrive at her own party. "You made it." "Apparently, just in time," I replied, letting the weight of my voice settle. Dad came down the stairs a few moments later, clapping Liam on the shoulder before nodding at me. "Glad you're here, kid. Big weekend." I narrowed my eyes. "For what exactly?" Before he could answer, Mom called out, "Don't spoil the surprise." There it was again. Surprise. Like I hadn't just funded this performance. I made my way to the kitchen, needing air, needing something that wouldn't feel like a lie. On the fridge, stuck with a floral magnet, was a catering invoice. I wasn't snooping. It was right there in plain sight. The top read, "Event. Congratulations, Liam. Guests 40 theme gold plus white cake. 2-tier with gold lettering." I blinked, then blinked again. My chest tightened. Not from shock, not even from hurt, but from that cold, sharp clarity I'd come to know too well. I pulled out my phone and opened a message to Sophie. "I think I funded my own erasure." I stepped out of the kitchen, still gripping my phone, heart pounding beneath my blazer. The catering invoice was burned into my mind now, the truth behind the draped tables and polished wine glasses. I tried to tell myself I was being dramatic, that it was a misunderstanding, but then the guest list confirmed it. On the hallway console table was a glossy trifold printout titled Evening Program wedged between floral escort cards. I picked it up quietly, flipping through the pages like I wasn't holding evidence. The title read, "Honoring Liam Shipley. A new chapter begins." No mention of me, no mention of my birthday, no hosted by Eleanor, no acknowledgement that I'd funded the entire evening. The most I got was a small line at the bottom that read, "With gratitude to our supportive family." I wasn't even listed among the committee names. I texted Isabel. She responded instantly. "Your mom told me it was a family-only dinner. She didn't say it was for you. In fact, she didn't mention your name at all." I didn't answer. Couldn't. The knot in my chest wasn't made of shock anymore. It was the quiet building kind of betrayal. The kind you can't scream about without sounding ungrateful. The kind you carry because nobody else wants to admit it happened. Through the archway, I saw Chloe adjusting a set of framed photos on the fireplace mantel. All of them were of Liam. Childhood soccer trophies, his senior photo in a navy blazer, him standing beside a professor in front of Stanford's campus. "You're going to want to step aside when the lights go up," she said without looking at me. "Mom's cueing the projector to hit this wall." She tapped the stone above the fireplace. "I thought this was my birthday dinner," I said flatly. She turned then, eyebrows raised like I'd said something inappropriate. "It is kind of. We just thought it made more sense to tie everything together. Be efficient, efficient." I moved past her and into the dining room where two distant relatives I barely recognized were sipping wine. One smiled at me. "You must be the event planner," she said cheerfully. "Everything looks gorgeous." I didn't bother correcting her. The sun was beginning to set. Light spilled across the kitchen floor in soft golden streaks. I walked slowly through the space, brushing my hand along the edge of the dining table. Then the marble countertop, still as spotless as the day I left home for college. In the hallway, I passed the makeshift legacy wall they'd assembled for Liam. It spanned the length of the corridor, filled with Polaroids, handwritten notes, childhood drawings, none of which I'd ever seen. Apparently, this had been in the works for weeks. Mom passed by with a tray of stuffed mushrooms. She paused just long enough to say, "We're so proud of you too, honey. You just never wanted the spotlight. That's what makes you special." Special. The word curled in my stomach like sour milk. I'd heard it before. Every time I stayed silent when Chloe lied. Every time I gave up something so Liam could shine. When I was 15, I fell from my bike and cracked my wrist. I sat on the porch with my hand wrapped in a dish towel while Mom raced to finish Liam's science project. By the time we made it to urgent care, the nurse asked if it had happened hours ago. It had. That night, Dad said, "You're the tough one. You'll be fine. Your brother needed the attention." I was fine for 2 decades. No one ever asked if that had a cost. Now, as I watched distant cousins file in with congratulatory cards and dressed-up babies, I realized what I was really witnessing. I hadn't just paid for the cake and flowers. I had bought the spotlight they never meant to give me. I stepped into the guest bathroom and locked the door. My reflection in the mirror stared back, eyes dull but steady. I pulled out my phone and opened the Notes app. I started typing, not with rage, but with precision. "I paid for this." Then another line. "I transferred $4,000 to host a dinner that erased me." And another. "My name isn't on the program. I'm not even in the slideshow." I paused. My fingers hovered over the screen. Something inside me was sharpening, and I no longer felt like hiding it. I stepped out into the backyard just as the string lights blinked on, casting a warm glow over the setup. The night air was crisp with a hint of freshly cut grass, and guests were beginning to settle into their assigned seats. Clinking glasses, polite laughter, and the soft hum of a playlist I didn't recognize filled the air. I glanced around for any sign of a birthday cake. There wasn't one. Instead, the centerpiece of the lawn was a tall board draped in cream-colored satin, positioned like it was waiting for a dramatic reveal. I could already see the outline of bold lettering beneath the fabric. A man in a black dress shirt stood nearby, preparing to pull it down. Then, with no announcement, he gave the string a quick tug. The fabric fell. "Congratulations, Liam. Stanford bound." The letters were embossed in gold, surrounded by flickering lights and small photos of Liam at different stages of his life. The guests clapped enthusiastically. Some even stood up. There was no mention of my birthday. Not a single candle. No "Happy birthday, Eleanor." No "Thanks for coming home." Just Liam, Liam, and more Liam. A family friend at the next table raised their glass. "Let's take a moment to recognize what an amazing achievement this is. Stanford, that's no small thing." I looked down, swirling the ice in my untouched drink. From across the table, Chloe leaned toward Liam and adjusted the collar of his button-up shirt. "Smile for the camera," she cooed, already holding up her phone for a selfie. She posed beside him like it was her name on the banner. Too. When she turned, she caught my gaze and didn't even flinch. She said, "This whole thing came together beautifully. Sometimes it takes a little sacrifice to celebrate what really matters." I didn't respond. My fists were clenched beneath the table. A few moments later, Liam wandered over, drink in hand, smile as casual as if we were old college friends reconnecting. "You're okay with this, right?" he asked, leaning in like we were sharing a private joke. I mean, I didn't know they were going to go this big. But hey, it's a big moment. I figured you'd understand. My jaw tightened. "Understand what exactly?" He shrugged. "You've never been the attention type. That's kind of your thing." Behind him, Chloe called out again. "Besides, it's not like you ever wanted a fuss. That's always been your superpower, right? Staying in the background." I looked him square in the eye. Not by choice. His expression flickered just for a second, but then he raised his glass and walked off. I didn't follow. I stood there, rooted, eyes drawn once again to that glowing banner like it was a neon sign spelling out every quiet rejection I'd swallowed over the years. A memory slipped in like smoke. My senior year of high school, I had earned valedictorian. I worked nights at a bookstore, took care of Chloe when she had bronchitis, kept my GPA spotless. My speech had been rewritten 5 times. On graduation day, I scanned the crowd from the podium. The row where my family was supposed to sit was empty. Later, they told me they had to take Liam to a math competition. A once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, Mom had said. "You'll have other speeches." I had smiled and nodded then, too, just like I always did. Back in the present, I slowly made my way into the kitchen. The lights were off except for the faint undercabinet glow. I leaned on the counter, steadying my breath. On the corner of the island sat a manila envelope. I flipped it open and pulled out the check I had written. For $1,000. My name in blue ink on the bottom line. The same check that had paid for the linens, the servers, and the banner that didn't even acknowledge I existed. I folded it back slowly, slid it under the envelope, and placed it exactly where I found it. My voice came out barely above a whisper, but firm. "One more move like this and I'm done pretending." The evening air had cooled into a mild breeze as dessert trays made their way to the tables. String lights above flickered on in a steady glow, bathing the backyard in warm amber. Guests chatted, champagne flowed, and at the center of it all, Liam glowing under the attention I paid for. A soft chime tapped against a wine glass. All eyes turned to Chloe. "Before we move on to cake and all that," she said, laughing as if she were standing in front of her own wedding crowd, "let's just take a moment to raise our glasses to the man of the hour. Liam, future MBA from Stanford. Brains, charm, and apparently a very stylish wardrobe now, too." The crowd chuckled. Liam stood giving a short speech. Predictable, flattering, safe. He thanked his parents, thanked Chloe, mentioned how none of this would have been possible without the unwavering support of family. My name, not once. Then the host, a neighbor I vaguely remembered from childhood, gestured in my direction. "And of course," he said, "there's one more Shipley we all admire. Eleanor, why don't you say a few words?" The crowd turned toward me, polite, curious. I stood slowly, reaching for the small note I'd folded hours ago in my clutch. My heartbeat was steady, not frantic, controlled. I stepped forward, but before I could take 2 full strides, my father was in front of me. He smiled wide, warm enough to look genuine to anyone watching, but his hand clasped mine tightly. "Don't ruin this, sweetheart," he said softly, low enough only I could hear. "You've always been above attention-seeking." I tried to pull away, but he held firm. His thumb pressed into the inside of my wrist, not hard enough to bruise, but firm enough to remind me who still thought he held the reins. "If you say anything now, you won't just lose this party," he continued, still smiling. "You'll lose the family, the house, the legacy, everything." I blinked once, not in disbelief, but in recognition. He was doing it again. What they had always done. Silencing me with the illusion of stability, laced with control, a threat dressed in a compliment. He let go and stepped aside, gesturing toward the crowd like a stage director cueing the understudy. I turned back toward my seat instead, every muscle in my body burning not to shake. Grandma Rose, seated 2 tables over, caught my eye. Her hand was wrapped around her wine glass, but her gaze was razor sharp. She mouthed something slowly. "Don't stay silent this time." I sat down, eyes fixed on the flickering candle centerpiece in front of me. I didn't speak. Not yet. But I wasn't still. Not inside. A memory stirred. A night from years ago. I had just received a full ride to graduate school in Chicago. It was my moment. I came home to tell them, barely containing my excitement. Mom barely looked up from folding laundry. Dad was more concerned with how Liam would get to his internship now that I'd be taking the car to campus. "You don't mind taking the train for the first semester, right?" he said. "Liam needs the car more than you do." I didn't argue, I just nodded. That nod cost me 3 hours of commute daily and my scholarship eventually when I started missing early classes to accommodate work shifts. They never brought it up again. Now, as the waiter cleared plates and the lights dimmed again, I reached into my clutch. The note was still there, creased but firm. I touched it, then touched my phone. Everything I needed was in my hands. I looked around the yard, the banner, the lights, the chatter, but it was all built on my silence. "Not this time," I whispered under my breath. "This isn't their party anymore." The lights were still warm above us, swaying slightly in the breeze as the servers began pouring coffee and placing dessert trays along the tables. Clusters of guests leaned in for quieter conversation. It should have been the moment for birthday wishes and laughter if this had been my night, but it wasn't. I stood up slowly, clutching my glass. Not the one I'd been drinking from, but a clean one I'd swapped minutes earlier from the serving table. A small detail maybe, but it mattered to me. I wasn't about to toast my truth with something already tainted. The chatter faded as people turned toward me. I wasn't going to say anything. I began. My voice steady despite the storm rising in my chest. "But since I funded this entire evening, I feel entitled to 30 seconds. Pin drop moment followed. Chloe's fork froze midair. My father tilted his glass, but didn't sip. Even Liam paused, his arm still looped around one of his old friends. I didn't look at any of them directly. I transferred $4,000 thinking this was a birthday dinner. I continued, letting the words come without tremble. "And I arrived here to find banners with someone else's name, speeches I didn't expect, and not one mention, not one, that this was meant to celebrate me." I scanned the crowd. Some looked down at their plates. A few blinked, clearly uncomfortable. "And I'm not upset that it became a celebration for someone else," I added. "What hurts is that I was used to make it happen." A few heads turned toward my mother, who was standing near the side table. Lips parted but silent. Her gaze darted toward Dad. No one moved to interrupt me. Then from behind, Chloe's voice cracked through the stillness like a whip. "Oh, here we go," she spat, her laugh sharp. "You've always been jealous of me and Liam. Anytime someone else shines, you act like you've been wronged." I turned to face her fully. "I don't mind the spotlight being shared," I said calmly. "I mind when it's stolen. There's a difference." She opened her mouth again, but someone cleared their throat near the back table. A murmur began. I caught part of it. "Wait, she paid for all this?" Chloe turned toward them, defensive. "Don't listen to her. She's twisting everything." "She's not twisting," came a voice I didn't expect. Marcus, Chloe's boyfriend, was already standing, his jaw tense. "She's calling out what the rest of us were too polite to question." The look Chloe gave him could have sliced glass. He didn't flinch, just walked away from the table and toward the driveway, hands in his pockets. I turned back to the crowd. My entire life I've been told I was the strong one, the dependable one, the one who didn't need applause. I drew in a breath. But that's not strength. That's being conditioned to accept less than respect. I folded the note back into my purse. "I'm not here to ask for anything," I finished. "I just wanted you all to know the truth. This is the last time I'll fund my own erasure." And then I stepped down, not expecting applause, and none came. But no one spoke either. It wasn't silence from indifference. It was the silence that follows a crack. When something you thought was solid suddenly fractures, I didn't need their approval. What I needed was already mine. I hadn't even made it back to my seat before the vibration hit my palm. I looked down at my phone, screen still warm from a recent notification. Instagram. Chloe had just posted a story. Curiosity outweighed dread, and I tapped. Slide 1. Chloe holding up a glass of rose framed by fairy lights. Her caption reading, "So proud of you. Liam Shipley, Stanford bound. Family first." Slide 2. Liam cutting into a cake I didn't order beneath a banner I didn't approve. Slide 3. A group shot of them all standing on the patio. Mom, Dad, Liam, Chloe, no me, not even cropped, just absent. That was the version of the night she wanted to tell the world. A curated erasure. A lie in lace and lanterns. I tucked my phone back into my clutch, fingers rigid with disbelief, and walked across the lawn toward the poolside bar where she stood posing again. one hand on her hip, the other holding her phone as if it were a scepter. "Even now?" I asked, not raising my voice. I didn't need to. Chloe turned, still smiling. "What? You really posted all that like nothing happened? Not even a mention? You don't find that a little?" She cut in, her tone syrupy. "This night was never about you, Eleanor. You're the one making it awkward." That word awkward hit harder than if she'd screamed. "I paid for this," I said flatly. "Sure, and it looked great," she quipped. "You always did have good taste." I could see her rehearsed calm starting to fray at the edges. But before I could respond, I heard footsteps behind us. Marcus. He walked up slow, hands in his pockets, his face unreadable, jaw locked. "You told me this was Eleanor's birthday dinner," he said, tone measured. "A small gathering. Family only, something meaningful." Chloe blinked too quickly. "It is. I mean, you saw how she acted." I saw the only adult in the room speak up. He interrupted. His eyes didn't leave hers. "And I saw you take advantage of her just like the rest of them. Marcus, come on." "No," he said, "I'm done." He looked at me, gave a nod, not of pity, but of recognition, and turned toward the driveway. The soft click of his shoes across the brick path was the only sound for a moment, save for the quiet shifting of guests. People were murmuring now. Heads turned, eyes flicked between me, Chloe, the house. Some guests looked away. Others started packing up their belongings, slipping off their heels. The illusion was cracking. I noticed Martha at the patio table refilling her glass of white wine. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at anyone. Just stared forward, mechanical. Dad beside her, arms folded, the veins in his neck taut. I wasn't sure if they were pretending to be unaffected or if they genuinely thought silence still made them powerful. Someone from the far table whispered just loud enough, "She funded the whole thing." Another voice followed. I thought it was her party. Chloe spun on her heel and disappeared into the house, her phone still glowing in her palm. Liam wasn't far behind, vanishing into the shadows near the garage. I didn't follow them. I sat back down, dusting off the back of my dress like nothing about me was unraveling. Grandma Rose reached across the table and laid her hand on mine. "It's almost over," she said, voice warm. "Low." I turned to her, heart steady now. "No," I whispered back. "It's just beginning." The patio was quieter now. The fairy lights still glowed, but they no longer felt like celebration. More like interrogation lamps on a truth too long denied. Guests moved toward the driveway in small packs, avoiding eye contact, whispering just loud enough to sting. I sat still, letting the echoes of my speech settle into the soil beneath my feet. Chloe had stormed off. Liam was hunched by the fountain like a child who'd just been told recess was over forever. And my parents were the picture of forced composure, sipping what was left of their champagne like royalty on a sinking ship. I stood to leave. I reached for my purse, trying not to let my hands tremble when Grandma Rose's voice rang out like a church bell through the thick silence. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. "Before everyone leaves," she said, standing next to the empty dessert table, "Walter and I would like to clarify something." Clarify? The murmur stopped. Heads turned. My grandfather, Walter, who rarely spoke more than 3 words at a time, stepped forward with a manila folder in his hand. The light caught the gold seal on the top page, a legal document. My heart slowed. Or maybe it stopped altogether. "We've updated our will," Walter said, voice firm. "As of last week, the house, the land, and the trust will go solely to Eleanor." Gasps. Audible, unrestrained gasps. I heard Martha inhale like she'd been punched in the chest. Thomas slammed his champagne glass so hard on the tray, the stem snapped. Chloe came charging back from inside, cheeks flushed, voice already sharp. "You're choosing her after everything she just did. After she embarrassed the whole family." Grandma Rose didn't even blink. "We're not choosing. We're recognizing what's always been there." Liam muttered something under his breath and turned away. I didn't catch it. I didn't care. I stepped forward slowly. Everyone was watching again. But this time I wasn't shrinking. "I never asked for more," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I just wanted enough. Enough to feel like I mattered. Enough to believe I wasn't invisible." Thomas took a step closer. His face was calm, but his words hit like a fist. "You walk out now. Don't expect to call us again." I looked at him, really looked at him. The man who raised me to believe love came with performance metrics. And I realized I no longer feared being cut off. You already made that call for me, I said. Grandma Rose came beside me and held my arm. Not like a fragile girl needing protection, but like a general standing beside her successor. I turned to leave. No drama. No slam of the door. Just the simple act of walking away with what was mine. I didn't look back as I climbed into my rental. The driveway was nearly empty now. The once packed yard reduced to a few clusters of silence. The road to my grandparents' house was long and winding, lined with fading trees and the weight of decades. I drove with the windows cracked, the cool air brushing my face like an old friend. My phone buzzed. A voicemail from Thomas. I didn't need to hear it to know what it said. I opened it anyway. The preview read, "You made your choice, so be it. As far as we're concerned, you're no longer our daughter." I didn't press play. I deleted it without hesitation, without flinching. But not before letting the words imprint themselves like a scar I would no longer hide. Because sometimes deletion is not about erasing. It's about choosing what deserves space. And this time I chose me. I didn't drive home that night. I arrived. Grandma Rose was already waiting at the front steps, arms folded over her apron, the porch light making her look both soft and commanding. Walter opened the door before I even reached for the knob. I stepped inside and it felt less like returning, more like finally arriving somewhere I'd always deserved to be. The smell of lemon zest drifted from the kitchen. Grandma Rose had baked a cake. No banners, no engraved names, no filtered stories, just her. Her worn oven mitts, and 2 thick slices waiting on plates. "Sit," she said, pouring chamomile tea into mismatched mugs. "No speeches tonight, just peace." Walter chuckled and lifted his fork. Now this feels like a party worth paying for. And he was right. For the first time in what felt like years, my shoulders settled. Not collapsed from exhaustion, but lowered in relief. The next morning, I packed my things without saying goodbye to Springfield. I wasn't running. I wasn't fleeing. I was simply walking forward, lighter. Back in Chicago, Monday greeted me with sunlight and the low hum of a city that never needed to know the details. My team at work had decorated my office window with a handwritten sign. "Your voice matters." I never told them why that line made my throat close up. They didn't need to know. The truth was mine, and that was enough. I buried myself in projects intentionally, joyfully. I accepted client dinners again, laughed too loud at dumb jokes, and took walks without checking my phone every few minutes. Somewhere between a silent drive and a voicemail I never finished, I had chosen something I never had before. Me. 3 months later, I hosted a dinner. It wasn't large, just a few close friends and a bottle of wine that none of us could pronounce. No catered platters, no curated playlists, just mismatched chairs, one lasagna dish, and people who knew how to listen without keeping score. At one point, someone asked gently, "Will your family be joining for the holidays?" I set my fork down, wiped the corner of my mouth, and smiled. "They already did what they came to do," I said. "Now I'm doing what I was born to." No one pushed further. The conversation drifted elsewhere, and I let it. I didn't need anyone to understand the entire storm, just that I had survived it. That Sunday, I visited Grandma Rose and Walter again. Grandma Rose was tending her roses, Walter pretending to rake, but mostly just rearranging leaves. We sat on the porch, sipping lemonade, watching the breeze tangle itself through the wind chimes. Grandma Rose asked, her voice quiet, "Do you regret telling them the truth?" I watched a robin settle on the fence. My answer didn't take long. "I regret waiting so long," I said. The next weekend, I stayed in. No calls, no social events, just a small grocery store cake I picked up last minute. One candle and a lighter I had to dig out of the back of a drawer. I lit the candle not for celebration, not for show, just for acknowledgement. Of the day I was born, of the woman I had become, of the space I had finally claimed. No song, no audience, just the flicker of flame reflecting in my kitchen window and the steady breath of a woman who for the first time was no longer performing for love that came with strings. And in that moment, I whispered what no one else had ever said loud enough for me to believe. "Happy birthday, Eleanor." I didn't leave with applause. I left with something better. Peace. Not everyone will see your worth, but the day you do, that's the only light that really matters. Sometimes the loudest courage is the kind that doesn't demand applause. It just quietly chooses truth. Eleanor didn't fight for a stage. She fought for a name, her own. Have you ever had to walk away from people who claim to love you just to finally love yourself? Share your story in the comments. We read everyone. And if this family drama moved you, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the next chapter.